Airport employees, what is the saddest goodbye you've witnessed? I worked at a very small regional airport, so I dealt with passengers from check-in to boarding. Often the passengers and their families would stay together all the way up until boarding. An elderly gentleman was dropping off his son who had flown in from overseas where he lived for a visit. It was just us three in the terminal at the time, and after check-in the dad looked at his son and said, "I have to go before I'll lose it," and he hugged his son, shook his hand and left. His son stood looking out the window to the tarmac and I could see he was getting a little upset. It was just us, so I walked over and asked if he was okay. He starts crying and says this is probably the last time I am going to see my dad. He then tells me his dad is terminally ill with cancer and he has to return to his job overseas. All I could do was hug the guy and cry with him. It was very upsetting to me even as a stranger. I want you to know I think you did the right thing when you asked him how he was and hugged him. Acts of empathy like that are the little things that keep people going. Not an employee, but I saw a family of 3, mom, dad, teenage son, saying goodbye to another younger guy they had hosted at their house for an exchange program or something. The mom was crying and saying that he was part of the family and to visit whenever he wanted. The guy leaving looked pretty torn up, but the dad and the teenage son looked pretty stoic. As the exchange student was leaving, he said goodbye to each of them by hugging them and calling them mom, dad, and brother. The dad and teenage son literally burst into tears and starting sobbing really loudly. It was really sweet but really sad. The saddest goodbye was actually saying goodbye for the final time to one of my friends. He had worked for multiple airlines in the airport and was well liked by everyone. He died suddenly in his sleep and it devastated everyone in our small airport family. His family wanted to bury him in his hometown, so we had to ship his body away. Basically the whole airport had stopped operating while his friends loaded his body onto the aircraft taking him home. The whole ceremony performed was very emotional, but I'm glad he got to take to the air even after death. That last sentence is beautiful. Worked as an airport employee for a while. One of my duties was to accompany minors who were flying alone. Well, there was this tiny boy, 10 at the time, that I had to meet after his check-in. His mom checked him in, she saw me waiting. Then she said, "Can you give me a few minutes to say goodbye?" I said sure, stepped aside. Then she knelt so she can look the boy in the eye. She brought him to me after a few minutes, so I walked with the boy towards the gate. He looked sad, so I made small talk and told him where he was going and if he were meeting someone where he is going. Apparently his parents are separated and his mom is sending him to his dad because she can't afford to feed him adequately and send him to school. She also can't afford a round-trip plane ticket to go with him, which is why the kid's flying alone. He said he's never going to see his mom again because he is sure his dad won't allow him to. As a child of a bad divorce myself, his story broke my heart. Used to be a wheelchair attendant for an international airport. I was assisting the gentleman get the wheelchair and his wife was explaining to him it would only be for a few weeks and that everything would be okay. The man starts crying, saying he doesn't want it to be far away and he's concerned about his visit back home. She consoled him and asked me to make sure he got to the gate okay. I gave my word I would. So as we're going through security, I begin talking to him and I found out why he was so upset. This guy was a Scottish World War II veteran and he was going back home for the first time since leaving after returning from the war. He began to tell me his life story, how he lost his older and younger brother during Dunkirk because the British Army required the Scottish military members to hold back the Nazis while the British troops escaped. He told me how he got injured in combat and was treated by an American medic that later became his wife. He told me of his jobs after the war, about his children, about his grandchildren and how he has a great grandchild on the way. He then told me about why he's going back home after all this time in America. It was because he had cancer that likely will be untreatable and he wanted to stay in his home village and try to get medical treatment there until the end. However, his wife had to work another week or so and wouldn't be in the country and he was upset because he didn't want to pass away with her not by his side. I had to hide my tears after that one. After hearing all that, I perfectly understood why he was getting emotional. His flight wasn't taking off for a few hours after I dropped him off, so that day I checked up on him every hour, had lunch with him, and eventually other people started hanging out with him when they noticed he was alone and he began smiling and laughing with them. But just thinking about him gets me teary-eyed. You'll take the high road and I'll take the low road. And I'll be in Scotland afore ye, where me and my true love will never meet again, on the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. I worked at Barcelona airport for a few years, and the saddest moment was also a goodbye moment. A couple with a baby of 2 came to Barcelona to visit the family of hers. She was Spanish, he was British. It broke my heart when we at the sales desk realized that Jim Wilson, who requested special assistance, was on the flight. Jim Wilson is airline carrier code for a corpse being transported back home. So yes, the dead body was the baby of 2 who apparently collapsed for reasons I don't know, and now was being sent back to England. There was literally 30 people, all family of hers in the airport, saying goodbye to the little coffin. I never saw a most lost person than the mother and the grandmother. It was shocking. Many of our co-workers had to take a break for several minutes as they could not stop crying. Now I'm a father of a 9-month baby girl, and I'm just crying remembering this. I hope that family found a way to deal with the pain. How do you make a trip away from home with a baby, and a trip back without and keep it together? I am a father of 3 and we had a too close a call on vacation once. This story hits me hard. A friend of mine was staying from China as au pair, I think it's called. On the last day we all go to see her off at the airport. We all exchange hugs, talk about meeting again, give phone numbers, etc. Then one guy who gives her another hug just straight out says, "You were the best frick ever." She is blushing at this point and we all stunned. We asked them and no, they weren't dating because she would have to go home soon. She left blushing, and we had a good laugh about it. The dude who said it was just standing there as we walked away, a very kind of weird look on his face. When we asked what's up, he just said, "I hope she comes back." She came back. Man, thanks for giving me a laugh in a thread full of feels. I'm not an employee, but I was dropping off my long distance BF at the time and thought I was sad until I saw this other goodbye. It looked like an exchange student was saying goodbye to his exchange family. I eavesdropped a bit and heard him tell the mom that he is really grateful that they housed him and gave him this great opportunity to study in the States. The mom grabbed him and just hugged the crap out of him while crying. I just felt so sad for them. It looked like he had really made a place for himself in their family, and it was as if the mom was saying goodbye to not just one of her own kids, but to one that she would most likely never see again. I hope they at least stayed in contact with one another. I work at an international airport in Germany. I was checking in an older lady who told me she has cancer and she is going to Morocco to get cannabis oil because that is supposed to help support the chemotherapy she is doing. 2 weeks later, a young girl was at the airport demanding a ticket to Morocco, crying her eyes out. It was like a punch in the gut. Not an airport employee, but having to hug my baby brother goodbye when he was headed back to a war zone after being on leave was awful. We would all be strong and positive for him, then sob as soon as he was out of sight. Thank goodness he's been out of the army and home safe for 7 years now. I know what you mean. I remember hugging my older brother and saying my goodbyes when he left for Afghanistan back in 2010. I cried a tad bit, hurt right in the feels seeing him gone for 13 months. When I was in college, I used to work at an airport in a smaller city as a passenger assistant during the summer. I would help people with their baggage or help push people in wheelchairs to their gates, etc. On more than one occasion I pushed late-stage cancer patients to their gates who were flying to another city for chemo treatments. A lot of times family members would walk with us all the way up to the gate to say goodbye, just in case it was the last time. Broke my heart each and every time. I didn't see it happen in person, but realized it when I seen it on TV. When people were emigrating from my country during the recession, many were saying goodbye to their grandparents for the last time. Very sad. I worked at an Irish airport in 2009 and that was tough enough, watching 21, 22 years olds heading off to Australia, etc. Parents and grandparents breaking down as they left the airport, and that's with Skype available. I can't even imagine putting someone on a boat and knowing you would probably never see them again. Not an airport employee, but a little kid was bawling his eyes out and clinging to his dad's leg to stop him from going. I think the kid was going to stay with some older relatives, maybe grandparents. Looks like the kid loves his dad. Sorry to hear the story. My ex took my 11-month-old son almost 3,000 miles away to California. I saw him 2 weeks a year for 2 years. I missed his first birthday. I missed Christmas. It sucked. And the airport employees were visibly shaken because I unashamedly begged her not to leave with my kid till she got to TSA. Sorry that happened. I hope things are better now. Not an airport employee and not a goodbye. Once I flew to Shanghai and an old man in a wheelchair was wheeled off my flight and there was a huge kerfuffle at the exit as no one had come to pick him up. Normally for wheelchair-bound elderly people, airline employees hand over to a relative. This man had dementia and when they called his family in Australia, who put him on the plane, they said they couldn't cope with him anymore. He had a slip of paper with the phone number of his other child in China who said they never agreed to look after him and didn't want anything to do with him. So the airline called the police and in the end they said the old man would be taken to a homeless shelter to wait for a government-sponsored nursing home. I don't know what happened to him but it was incredibly sad. That made me cry. How awful. Okay, I know this doesn't technically answer the question, but here's a little happy amidst the sad. I'm in a long distance relationship, opposite sides of the US, and recently I brought my partner to the airport and was waiting to make sure he got through security. He has a history of doing things like accidentally throwing away his boarding pass and having to go through the whole line over again. I guess I looked sad and or lost, and I sometimes get mistaken for a teenager when I'm dressed down, so employees kept asking me if I needed help. I politely brushed them off until finally explaining to one of the check-in agents who seemed extra worried that I was just making sure my guy got through security okay. She led me back to her counter where there was a window to the security line so I could flag him down once he got through and have one last goodbye through the glass. She even took pictures while we had a Kirk Spark moment. So I just wanted to say thank you to the nice airline lady for being really sweet despite probably dealing with a lot of crap all day. She probably puts up with a lot of crap all day but she will always remember that when she thinks about that day. That bittersweet moment of happiness on a sad occasion. Not an airport employee but when my grandma passed away a girl who worked at a bus station said she's seen my grandma and my cousin saying goodbye to each other, my cousin holding on to my grandma and saying he didn't want to leave her. She's taken care of him ever since he was a baby, and she looked at him and said stop being like this. I'm not gonna die. That was the very last time he's seen her. Whoa. Whenever a fallen soldier comes home, and especially if that soldier had his or her trusty companion with them too, seeing those caskets come out from the plane just punches you right in the gut. I talked to a soldier once. He said he is no longer afraid of battles. What he fears most is delivering a dead body of a friend to their family. Am I allowed to add one more not an airport employee here? Not that I bet anyone working remembers me there. I was only in there a few times. The first one was by far the saddest. An agreement between me and my ex had me sending our dog to them, all the way across the country. The dog that had been my only companion when said ex moved away, who we'd raised together from a puppy, and I was sending away my only companion, a long ways away, by herself, on a flight to California, as if the 45-minute drive to the airport wasn't hard enough with her in the backseat, in her carrier, whimpering and fussing because we were in the car at all. By the time they brought the cart out to put her extra large carrier onto it, I was losing it all. I choke up thinking about it, and it's been a little over a year. I hadn't cried that hard in a long time, seeing them taking her away, and it lasted a long time. I still choke up badly thinking about it, let alone the drive home, living on a friend's couch, preparing to move myself, to come back to no dog to hold, to greet, to hang out with or feed or take outside or anything. Just me in the quiet. I hope it's okay I posted this. Maybe just wanted it off my chest. I miss that dog quite a bit, and I know I can't get another one because of various reasons, so I think about her a ton, and every time I think of that trip to the airport I break down a little again. I don't know what people thought when they saw me crying my eyes out when I was saying goodbye to my beautiful sweet girlfriend at the airport and entering the gate for the plane. I couldn't stop crying, and when I looked back for the last time and saw her sobbing I was close to send everything to heck and go back to her arms. But of course that would have meant violating my visa by overstaying in the US and basically ruining my life. LDR are tough man, but she's worth it. I can relate. My best friend of 6 years and boyfriend of almost 1 just left for boot camp. It was tough seeing someone who has literally been there for most of my life go, even if it's temporary. We parted and I literally sat there sobbing for a good 5 minutes and then the rest of the car ride home. Much luck to you and your girl. Not an airport employee here. I was part of the sad goodbye. I met my girlfriend online, in Guild Wars, long ago, and after a few months of online dating, we finally met for a 5-day city trip in Lisbon. It was awesome up until the moment we had to go home again. I bawled my eyes out for hours, and when I had to board my plane, one of the flight attendants took me aside to ask me what was going on. Turns out the flight attendant had been in a long distance relationship as well, so they talked to me and were able to calm me down somewhat. That was over 3 years ago. The distance is gone and we are now living together in my home country. Those sad goodbyes were absolutely worth it, even if they were gut-wrenching. 5/7 would date my so again. 5/7. IDK how many people are going to get that, but it made me chuckle. We said goodbye to one of my best friends knowing we were probably not gonna see her again for a very long time. Her entire family plus a few friends kept a smile on our faces as we bid her goodbye and wished her luck. The second we were out of her sight, we all started crying and hugging each other. I'm in an international relationship. I don't know how the employees felt about it, but there are a few employees who witnessed a 6'3" guy in all black cowboy boots with spikes on them, mirrored aviators and a tattered cowboy hat crying his freaking eyes out at gate 3 while saying goodbye to his Irish fiancée. I even lost it when paying the person outside the parking garage once. It was this sweet old lady. I was choking back tears, and she made the mistake of saying, "Hey, are you okay?" Massive sobs. I'm sorry. I'm engaged to a woman who lives in another country and this is just really hard. So, I did honor guard a few years back, Air Force, and an airman was killed in a traffic accident overseas. His fiancée was back in the States. I had to carry the casket from the plane to the hearse while the family waited on the flight line. That was pretty rough since the guy was like 20 years old. Not a goodbye. Working one night, I passed by an elderly lady staring on cart dispenser. I asked her if she needed change for a cart. She turns around and started crying, telling me she had to fly down so fast she forgot to bring money with her. She flew home to pick up her husband's body who suddenly passed away. Made me cry. Gave her everything in my pocket and made sure baggage agents took care of her. Not an employee, but used to be in an LDR. Every goodbye was a heartbreak, but the last one, I'll never forget that. It was also the most embarrassing thing that has happened to me yet. We've been having some problems and I spent the summer with him. We both loved each other, and although we promised each other it wasn't the last time we'd see each other, we both kind of knew it would be, and that turned out to be true. I don't think I've ever cried this much. I actually felt so sick that I vomited into a trash can in front of everyone. Definitely not my proudest moment. Going through security and leaving was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. We broke up a month later because we just couldn't take the distance and the emotional roller coaster every time anymore. And there were other problems as well. One time I was flying out of El Salvador to the States and I saw this big burly man and his daughter saying goodbye to each other. He was bawling his eyes out telling her to be a good girl. I think she was immigrating to the United States and he couldn't go. It broke my heart. I used to work for a travel reward company, using credit card points to book travel, and one call was an older gentleman, high 70s, who was just loaded in points. He was friendly and normal from the conversations we were having while I completed his bookings and I enjoyed the chat. He told me he was going to use all his points that day, which prompted me to ask the question, "Oh, are we booking anyone else on this flight?" To which he responded, "Oh yes darling, we are booking the whole family." Cool, how generous. He then tells me that he is getting married to his girlfriend and flying the entire family out for the celebration. My heart melts. Then he tells me that it is a celebration of love and life and that he was recently diagnosed with a terminal cancer and is too old and too impatient to spend his days in the hospital, so he is locking down his lady and getting all his kids and grandkids together for one last hurrah of his life. I was silent in heartbreak. He then said to me that life is too short for being sad for someone who has lived long and fulfilling life like he did. I hope he had a heck of a send-off. TLDR. Older gentleman uses up all his reward points to pay for his entire family to attend his wedding before he passes from terminal cancer. Heartbreak ensues. Not an airport employee, but I recently had to say goodbye to my dad. My parents are divorced and I only see my dad 2 weeks a year. We meet in Italy, because I am not allowed to visit his new home on Bali or visit him generally until I am 18 years old. So yesterday I had to say goodbye knowing that I probably won't see my dad for 2.5 years, because my mother cancelled my trip to Italy for next year. The thing is that I am legally allowed to visit my dad, I just have to visit my lawyer and I would be able to visit him, but that would mean that my mother would always hate me and so on. She told me that that would be the consequence, so saying goodbye to my dad was really hard. I'm sorry your mom is putting you through this. Obviously I don't know your situation, but it sounds from your post like your mom is more of the problem than your dad, and if your mom is going to manipulate you like that, frick her. You don't need that. Talk to your lawyer if you can. No parent should put their child in that situation willingly. I hope everything works out. Not an airline attendant or anything here. I live very close to our local airport. I live about 2 miles from it on the same road. I have finally gotten used to hearing the big ones come in. I had left the house one day to go to the grocery store and also pick up some Togo Mexican food for dinner. All of this is farther down the road from the airport but still on the same road. While on the way, I noticed a hearse followed by a bunch of cars, so I pulled over to the side of the road and cut my car off because I live in the south and it is just a sign of respect to grieving family. Once it had passed, I went back on my way. I had finished shopping and went across the street to the Mexican restaurant. As I was pulling in, I noticed the same funeral procession coming by. So I get out of the car and notice dozens of cars lining the road with American flags. All of us are hanging our heads until it passes. This experience seemed a little odd to me for some reason, especially the people lining the roads. I assumed maybe a serviceman had passed in the Middle East and was being transported home. I watched the news that night and was not too far off. Apparently, a serviceman's bones from World War II had been identified and he was from a small town nearby. They were finally bringing him home to rest. Broke my heart thinking that 60 years ago, his parents probably never knew what happened to him. I was glad I got to pay my respects to him for giving his life for all of us. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.